I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
A denouncement, a defection, and yet more deflection. Another torrid day for the Prime Minister. Drama again at Prime Minister's questions. But has it bought Boris Johnson time to regroup? Our political editor is here with the latest intelligence.
Tonight there's greater confidence in the Cabinet about Boris Johnson's prospects. Others are not so sure.
We'll be hearing the verdicts of MPs and one of the biggest Tory donors. We're live in Bury. How do voters there feel about the fact their MP is the first defector from blue to red in 15 years? Lewis Goodall will be taking us through the questions that are still outstanding for Boris Johnson.
Yes, Kirsty, it was a day of parliamentary theatrics, but one question still looms large for Boris Johnson. Did he mislead the House of Commons?
And we'll be reading Boris Johnson's runes with 3 stellar political insiders. Good evening. This is a political farrago, but it's not a drama about policy or a clash of ideology. It's about personality and integrity, and also self-preservation on the front and back benches. And with each day that delivers a new twist and turn also comes, for some, an uneasiness that it's turning into a game, political advantage, then counterpunch. Today, a kick in the teeth from a Tory grandee, a former Brexit ally, and a defection straight to Labour by one of the 2019 intake. But Boris Johnson had recovered some of his pugilism in PMQs after yesterday's dejected interview. So how might that have impacted on the delivery of letters to Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922, and that putative vote of no confidence? Have more gone in? Have some been hastily withdrawn? Where is the most jeopardy now for the Prime Minister? I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watt. Nick, what was the atmosphere tonight at Westminster like?
Well, in assessing all of this, Kirsty, I do feel that I'm turning into a bit of a weather forecaster. So on Monday, there was a lull. Yesterday, there was a storm. And today, it feels like there's a better outlook for Boris Johnson, though maybe only in the short term. So the defection of that former Labour MP, Christian Wakeford, that really did lead to a closing of the ranks, and that did help Boris Johnson. Now, it was touch and go whether it would go that way. As soon as that happened in Cabinet, Minister was saying this could go against Boris Johnson, it could help him. But interestingly, as Prime Minister's question was underway, there was a sign that it was going to help Boris Johnson. I am told that in the I lobby, that's one of the corridors just outside the chamber, there were a number of Conservative MPs from the 2019 intake, very close to this now ex-colleague of theirs, and they were in tears. They were in tears because they felt that they had been giving him good pastoral support in difficult times, and they felt personally betrayed. One minister said the upside is that it reminds you where the real fight is, and that is with Labour. Talking to one member of the Cabinet tonight, and they were saying, I'm ending the day in a much better mood than I started, but then they said, in this world, an hour is now a long time in politics.
So is there a feeling that Boris Johnson is emerging from the woods?
Well, the Downing Street view is absolutely they are going to get through the Sue Gray report. That's the report next week into these parties. They're going to emerge from it unscathed, and they have a strategy about what they will do then. Ministers, I do have to say, and backbenchers, some ministers not so sure. I spoke to one, and this person said, look, Boris Johnson can turn this round, but he needs to change his ways. He's not in a good place. You saw that intervention there by David Davis, view in the Cabinet. That helped Boris Johnson. He's a lone wolf. David Davis absolutely convinced he's going to be vindicated. He only decided to do this morning. He was on his exercise bike this morning, listening to what Boris Johnson had said yesterday in that rather difficult, crestfallen interview. And David Davis's view is he was blaming others for what is happening now, which means he's going to blame others when the Sue Gray report comes out. That will not look very good for him. So look, temperature cool today, but another big day of drama. Packed to the rafters, high expectations of a day of political drama. drama galore, but a twist nobody had expected. Trademark union flag in place and a Conservative MP crosses the floor of the House. A newbie firing a shot at the start of the session, a veteran topping that at the end.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
I don't know what he's talking about, but what I can tell him, I don't know what quotation he's alluding to that he's referring. But what I can tell him is that I think I've told this House repeatedly throughout this pandemic, I take full responsibility for everything done in this government and throughout the pandemic.
A surprising memory lapse by the biographer of Winston Churchill, this Prime Minister's political hero, whose ascent to the premiership was helped by those words in the same place in 1940. This was a decisive day in Parliament, drama which confirmed deep unease about Boris Johnson's premiership on his side. But political defections are guaranteed to lead to a closing of the ranks. And tonight, Boris Johnson ends the day in a far stronger position than he began the day. And around here, smiles on the faces of cabinet ministers. But his internal critics are mumbling. The Prime Minister has bought time, but only for now. Wanting to push the mood in their direction, Downing Street dispatched MPs from the 2019 intake, those most nervous to hail the Prime Minister.
I'm here today because I want to stand with the Prime Minister. I was very sad to see one of my colleagues go today, but I think I don't think anything could have united us more than watching someone cross the floor like that.
I would be wrong to say that people haven't been upset over the last several weeks of bad news stories and announcements that have come out. But as you've seen in PMQs just there, people are united behind the Prime Minister.
And a loyalist manned the barricades.
I think what's happened over the last 24 hours is that colleagues have started to look at what's going on and have started asking themselves the question, what are we doing and where is this going? And I think there is a real sense of stepping back and realising that the right thing to do is to wait for Sue Gray's report, to then question the Prime Minister, as he's quite properly said he will come to the House of Commons and make a statement and answer for it, and then to give him space to embark on that important task of delivering, levelling up, delivering prosperity and opportunity for all our citizens throughout the United Kingdom.
A well-connected commentator says today has only bought Boris Johnson some limited time.
So he has a few more days, really, and the Cabinet is attempting, or some members of the Cabinet, others can't be found, but some members of the Cabinet are rallying around, saying that he's stronger, he's finished the day stronger than he started it. I'm not sure that I really buy that. And I still think, ultimately, this has sunk so deep into public perceptions and into the opinion polling and into the focus groups, when you look at what voters are really saying about the Prime Minister, that it is still the case that the Tory tribe has broadly decided that he's not going to fight the next general election and that it is essentially done with him.
Calm for the moment as Boris Johnson is gifted a respite. But this story is far from over.
Nick Watt, well, joining me now is the Conservative backbencher, chair of the Northern Research Group, Jake Berry, Labour's Shadow Policing Minister, Sarah Jones, and the business leader and philanthropist, John Caldwell, who's also been a significant donor to the Tory party. Jake Berry, beginning with you. I mean, there's no doubt that Boris Johnson came out fighting today, and he may well have G'd up the troops, but the trouble hasn't gone away.
Well, it was a pugnacious performance at Prime Minister's questions today, and I think that's exactly what colleagues wanted to see, and they did see. But I just reflect on the comments that you heard from the Minister, Conor Burns, in your preceding section to talking to us this evening. I think his view is correct. Colleagues have looked at what's happened today. They understand that, we have to back our Prime Minister, MPs have to band together, and we've sort of worked out again today who the real opposition is. And colleagues are coming out now strongly and supporting the Prime Minister as the right man to lead our country. And on all the big decisions, he's got the call right, whether it's COVID, Brexit, or creating the fastest growing economy in the G7. And I think colleagues are acknowledging that.
But you had, as he called himself, a new MP who was a lifelong Conservative crossing the floor of the House. That was you were completely blindsided by that.
I'm very sorry to see Christian Wakeford go. He's an MP very near me in Lancashire. But one thing I would say is that as someone who spent a lot of time campaigning in Bury South, not least for Christian Wakeford, is that the voters of Bury South are supporting the Conservative Party. They did at the last general election. And having, done campaigning work there myself, I can tell you there remains a wellspring of support for Boris Johnson, not just in Bury South, but across the north of England, and a compelling desire for people to see that levelling up agenda delivered across the north, as I know the Prime Minister will do.
John Caldwell, if I can turn to you. Last week you said to Boris Johnson, sort it out or step aside. The problem is he's not sorted it out, has he?
Well, he can't sort it out until he's given chance. But, of course, what he needs to sort out is overshadowed now about his own situation and whether he's complicit in the arrangements. And that's why we really do need to wait for Sue Gray's verdict on all of that. But, but I absolutely stand by that. He needs to sort it out. The party needs to clean its act up and go forward. And if that can be under Boris Johnson's leadership, then that's great, because I think he's done a lot of good things over the last couple of years. But if he can't unite the party and get rid of the sleaze and the difficulties that we're having, then a new leader would be better.
But that's interesting, because you're very clear where you stand on disobeying rules and also on sleaze. And I wonder if you would fund a Boris Johnson-led government again.
Well, I keep getting asked that, and...
well, you're a substantial donor. I think it was $500,000.
Yeah, but it was a one-off donation. And it was very, very strictly in a situation where I feared the destruction of Britain's fabric by Corbyn and McDonnell so much that I really wanted to support the Tory party. And also, I liked the policies, and I thought Boris could do a good job and get Brexit done. And indeed, he got Brexit done, albeit we've got one or two issues still outstanding, but he got Brexit done. I haven't agreed with everything that has been done within the pandemic. I think there's been a lot of mistakes made, but it was a tough job to do. And I think he's handled it as well as any politician might have done. So, I still would like to see Boris going forward, but I hate the sleaze. I hated the fact that he supported Owen Paterson at first. He should have just sacked him straight away. And of course, these parties are a fiasco. But we need to get beyond this, and Boris either needs to go or everybody needs to get behind him and drive the policies forward that we elected.
It's clear, John Caldwell, of course, that Boris Johnson has refused regularly to answer the question: if you are found to have misled Parliament, will you resign? Now that's interesting, because that's a very moral question for you, isn't it? You would say that was a moral question.
Well, I think the thing is, regardless of what I consider on the morality, that's what all politicians do, isn't it? They avoid the question totally. And I can understand why, because they don't want to dig a hole for themselves. But, I think if, depending on how damning, if it is damning, the Gray report is, then I think there comes a point at which, out of dignity and pride, he ought to resign. But I hope that's not the case. I hope he can sort this party out and sort himself out, because he's made mistakes and he should not have made those mistakes. And I would also make the point that I did offer Boris my services as an advisor on 2 different occasions via letter. And I can tell you without doubt, had I been in the Conservative Party as an advisor, I would have either fallen out with him and been sacked, or these things would not have happened.
Right. Sarah Jones, if I can turn to you. You escorted the newest Labour MP to his seat today. I mean, you got your defection, but didn't it just have the effect of the Conservatives closing ranks around their leader?
Well, I think Boris Johnson's lost authority, and for me it's a question of when, not if, he goes. Having a Conservative Member of Parliament cross the floor, which is a very difficult thing for a person to do, and I saw up front how hard it was
aren't popular on
for
either
him.
side sometimes,
Absolutely.
you know.
Having that happen on the same day that David Davis, this kind of big figure in the Conservative Party, attacks Boris Johnson means that, you know, I think he has lost all authority. And the two questions are, did he mislead the House? And is he capable of running the country? And we started the day with news of the highest levels of inflation in 30 years. That is what he should be focused on. But I do not think he is capable of focusing on those big issues of the day, because all he's doing is running around talking to people like Jake, trying to persuade them not to.
But you hear from Nick Watt that there is certainly, you know, certainly a kind of shoring up of Boris Johnson at the moment. And maybe it's a double game that Keir Starmer is playing. Maybe Keir Starmer would actually like Boris Johnson to be in place for the May elections and beyond, because his calculation may be that Labour would do better with Boris Johnson in place than a newly minted Prime Minister. So maybe it suits Keir Starmer. I mean, this is a political game. I
don't think Keir Starmer is playing some kind of double game. What Keir Starmer wants is for the country to be supported as we face a very difficult time with inflation, with energy prices, with the cost of living rising. He has a plan to fix these things. The government are completely avoiding any of these issues because they're completely mired in this party scandal. And we have a Prime Minister where the public are now saying, but he's not telling the truth. We don't believe him.
But we also understand that there are many people in the CLP in Bury South that are very unhappy about this.
Yep.
Now, they do see it as a kind of bit of trickery. I mean, it's fair to say, isn't it, that it might have been better if actually he had resigned and there had been a by-election. After all, he himself was somebody that actually believed that should actually happen. In a previous iteration, he thought MPs should do that. Wouldn't that be the fair way?
Well, what normally happens when MPs cross the floor is there isn't an immediate by-election, in the same way that when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, there wasn't an immediate election at that point. When Conservative MPs last crossed the floor back in the 1990s, I can remember I was young and just got involved in the Labour Party, and that was a big thing. People didn't at that point. The Change UK MPs didn't at that point. This is our slightly peculiar system, but that's the system that we have.
So, Jake Berry, do you take the view that there is absolutely nobody in the senior Conservative ranks who could lead the country effectively other than Boris Johnson?
Well, I certainly take the view that there is nobody in the senior Conservative ranks who can win back Bury South, which is exactly what we will do at the last election. Boris Johnson was the Prime Minister who led our party to an absolute stellar victory, the first Conservative majority since Margaret Thatcher, and he's absolutely the right person to do that again. And it's great to hear, you know, from Jim, big supporter of the Conservative Party, that he does think that if we get things sorted out, he'll come back and support us. What I would say to him is that threat, that existential threat to business that was represented by Jeremy Corbyn and his pals hasn't gone away. I do not think that Keir Starmer is the right person to lead this country. In fact, most voters, whatever they think about the Conservative Party, don't think that Keir Starmer is the right person to lead this country.
I don't think you'd be happy.
Sorry
to interrupt, but I'd just like to say, I think the opinion polls would suggest that there's a massive problem right now.
Absolutely.
Opinion polls are always asked a simple question: is what will happen if there was an election tomorrow? There isn't an election tomorrow. And, you know, I know that the Prime Minister, having made all the right calls during this pandemic, not locked us down before Christmas like the Labour Party was calling for, created one of the fastest growing economies in the G7.
He made mistake
after mistake. I just refer to the interview by the Labour Shadow Secretary of State for Health, who was calling for similar restrictions as they had in Wales. You know, he's made the right call on Brexit, where the Labour Party were opposing the will of the British people. He is focusing on the people's priorities, and that's the right thing to do.
If I could just turn to John Colwell before we finish. In your view, who would be your preferred candidate if indeed we come to a position where we see a replacement for Boris Johnson?
Well, let's first of all say I really hope that Boris Johnson can be vindicated on his action. I would still even then say, get a grip of the party because it happened on your watch, it's happened in your back garden. Get a grip of the party, sort it out and have clear moral standards. But if he were to go, if he was damned in this next analysis by this study, then I think possibly Jeremy Hunt might be the best guy. But we would lose the charisma that Boris has got and that election-winning style that he has. So I sort of hope he can be like a phoenix and rise from the ashes. But it's going to be a tough job. I just hope he gets there.
Thank you all very much indeed. Well, as we said, the voters of Bury South had a bit of a shock today, just minutes before PMQs. Their newly minted Conservative MP, the very first in the marginal constituency, won at the same time that red wall was so spectacularly breached in the 2019 election, had had enough. A Labour spokesman said the party had been in talks with Christian Wakeford for some time. However, it seems that Partygate had sent him over the top. Voters watching the weekly Commons event would have seen him sitting in a prominent position behind a cock-a-hoop Keir Starmer. But what will be the effect of the defection, both in the political calculations and, most importantly of all, the voters' calculations, those who sent Christian Wakeford to Westminster and those who didn't? Our economics editor, Ben Chew, is in Bury. Ben.
Well, Kirsty, the town of Bury knows a bit about political history. It was the birthplace of Sir Robert Peel, the former Conservative Prime Minister, who split the party over free trade in 1846. You might be able to see his statue illuminated behind me. The big question in Westminster might be, is Bury about to write another chapter of political history? But here on the ground in Bury, the question is a simpler one. Did their local MP do the right thing? I've been speaking to residents and voters today, and it's fair to say the reaction has been mixed.
I think it's disgusting that he's gone from one side to the other over what he could have. If it's Boris Johnson he wants out, then he should have got with the lads, the people, the other MPs who's tried to get him out, not to go from black to white overnight.
What would you say to him tonight, if you could?
I'd say, you know, have you had a brainstorm and done this? Because this is not the way you do things in life. You don't get voted in by say one thing to the Tory party 2 years ago and then now turn your back on him and walk away and be Labour.
Well, I think if he wanted change, he should have stayed within his own party, changed it from the inside. I understand he's done the vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson, but he can't change that if he's defected to the Labour Party.
So he's saying the Prime Minister's behaved really badly over the last 2 weeks.
I agree.
So if he doesn't support the leader and he thinks Keir Starmer would do better, he thinks he's doing the right thing by joining Labour. Is that not fair enough?
No, because he's completely changing his policies. The Labour Party and the Conservative Party have got totally different policies. You can't just change your policies and betray your electorate by going over to a different party.
They just jump to whatever's doing best at the time, don't they? Like, whilst he'll have been a Tory MP, he'll have been bigging it up for the Tories, won't he, saying how we can do this, how we can do that. Now he's going to be doing exactly the same for Labour, isn't he? So I don't think it's good.
Not impressed, then?
No, not really impressed, no.
But Boris Johnson, a lot of people saying he's behaved really badly, and that's why the MP, Christian Wakeford, has said he's gone. So isn't that fair enough?
That's fair enough, but I don't think nobody can do a better job than Boris at this moment in time.
I think it's a surprise, but and very brave for him to do that. I think it's a gamble, and only time will tell whether he's made the right decision, really.
Would it make you more inclined to vote for him next time?
Probably it would do, yes.
His convictions was Conservative and right-wing for the last election. He supported Boris Johnson for the last election, so how has that changed now? I don't.
Do you think Labour will welcome him in?
I think the meeting for Labour tomorrow will be very interesting. I think it would be very fun to go and watch that.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that most of the people who have been knocking on doors for the past 5 years for Labour are not going to accept him whatsoever.
Well, we did ask someone from the local Conservative Association to join us, but no one was available. But we have Richard Duggan from the Bury Times. Now, you got the exclusive interview with Christian Wakeford as soon as he'd resigned. What do you think the view of the people here in Bury is?
It's really mixed, to be honest. There are a lot of people who have commended Christian for his decision, saying it's brave, that he's following his principles by defecting to the Labour Party. But there are plenty of other people who are furious with him, saying they voted for a Conservative MP and now they have a Labour one.
Is this the first brick in the red wall that's going to go back to Labour? Can we expect others to follow in the north?
It wouldn't surprise me if there were others that decided to follow Christian's example and defect. I'm not sure how many there will be. I wouldn't guess there'd be too many, because again, it is a big decision and you're putting a huge amount of confidence in the voters to follow you into the next election, be that a general election or a by-election.
And what about the local Labour Party here? Do you think they're going to be as welcoming to their new MP as the National Labour Party is?
I think vocally a lot of them will be in public saying that they are very pleased that he has joined them, but I suspect behind closed doors there'll be a lot of people who will be voicing their disagreement with the decision. So
a mixed reaction. Do you think they could warm to him the more he shows himself around here and explains his decision?
I think he's going to have a bit of an uphill battle, because he really has to prove to people that he has made this decision, as he said in his resignation letter, for the interests of Bury South. Now, his majority, he won his seat by only 402 votes. That's not a lot. I think it's the 10th, one of the lowest marginals in the country. So actually, that is an uphill battle should this go to an election.
And Jake Berry was saying that Boris Johnson is still very popular in Bury, still very popular across the north. Is that your impression?
I think plenty of people across the north, they represent the country as a whole. There are a lot of people who still believe Boris Johnson should be Prime Minister, but there are also a lot of people who think he should resign after Partygate.
Yeah, so the Partygate has dented his popularity up here in the north, you would say?
I think so, yes. I think we all remember how tough lockdown was and the restrictions that we all abided by, and to see the people at the top flouting those rules is very galling.
Galling here on the ground. Kirsty, back to you.
Ben, thanks very much indeed. Well, so with Boris Johnson declaring confidently that the senior civil servant Sue Gray's findings will be delivered next week, what are the immediate hurdles for the Prime Minister? Our policy editor, Lewis Goodall, is at the Newsnight wall.
Yes, Kirsty, there was much attention today on the theatrics in Parliament, but the most important moment of substance at PMQs today actually came here.
When did the Prime Minister first become aware that any of his staff had concerns about the 20th of May party?
PM didn't answer directly, and it's that question and the lack of answer which is perhaps the central feature of British politics right now. Why? Well, because of this. It's section 1.3c of the PM's own ministerial code. It says ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation to the Prime Minister. Perhaps the biggest problem for Boris Johnson is whether the Sue Gray report finds evidence to suggest that he has done that. So what has the PM said to Parliament about these matters? Well, there are two main things which might be under consideration here. One, something that the PM told Parliament on December the 1st last year, one a week ago on January the 12th. Now let's take both of them in turn. Here's the PM speaking on December the 1st.
Was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister! What I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during number 10.
So the PM speaking specifically about the alleged party held a year previously on December the 18th, 2020, the Christmas party. He says that all guidance was followed in number 10. Now, this was a party which reportedly went on until 2 a.m, featured Secret Santa and dozens of people in it, all while London was in Tier 3. Now, a lot of people have said that that means that the PM did mislead the House, because how could that event or others have been within the guidance? Well, it's certainly true that the PM's justification about that party has changed over time, from the guidance was followed to I was assured the guidance was followed, and that there was no party, to expressing his dismay with what happened. But on this narrow point about what he said on December the 1st, he might argue that he didn't knowingly mislead the House, because here he was referring solely to the Christmas party event, and he believed what he was saying at the time on the basis of the assurances he received because he wasn't there. So let's go instead to strand 2, that on the flowchart, relating to what he said on this time last week on January the 12th, this time about the May 20th party. That's the one that he was at for 25 minutes, you'll remember, with the infamous BYOB email. Now, here's what he said about it last week.
When I went into that garden just after 6 on the 20th of May 2020 to thank groups of staff before going back into my office 25 minutes later to continue working, I believed implicitly that this was a work event.
So the PM says he implicitly believed this was a work event, but Dominic Cummings has claimed that the PM was warned that the event was a problem by himself and potentially one other person, and that he will tell Sue Gray that. Now, that is something that the PM had to respond to just yesterday.
I can tell you categorically, that nobody told me, and nobody said that this was something that was against the rules, that was a breach of the COVID rules, or we were doing something that wasn't a work event.
So the PM had a very particular wording, you'll notice there, and he repeated it. I can tell you categorically that nobody told me that this wasn't a work event or that it broke the rules. But when asked if someone had spoken to him about it at all, that's what Starmer asked him today, the PM didn't answer, and he didn't answer in that interview. And this is where we come to potential difficulties. And the central question asked but unanswered at today's PMQs: did someone speak to the PM at all about this event? Because if someone did speak to him about it, even if they didn't use those words explicitly, if they just raised concerns, the question will be, can the PM actually say that he implicitly believed it to be a work event and compliant? Because if you implicitly believe something, doesn't that mean that you believe it without question? You hadn't thought about it. And if someone has questioned it, then you will have thought about it. How can you still implicitly believe it? And that is what he told the House. And the alternative to that isn't much better for the PM either, because that would be that someone did speak to him about it, he ignored their objections because in his assessment the event continued to be appropriate, which raises the question as to how well he understood his own rules and or about the quality of his judgment. Now, it may be that Sue Gray doesn't adjudicate on these matters. Indeed, she probably won't, but she may provide enough information for others to do so, and in that case the PM will have to have answers and explanations, partly about what he's already said. And after a day of fascinating parliamentary theatre, Kirsty, it is these questions and the shadows that they're casting which are still looming long over the Prime Minister.
Lewis at the wall. Well, after another dramatic day in politics, we've assembled an esteemed political panel to unpack it all. Ian Dale, broadcaster and former Chief of Staff to David Davis. Salma Shah, former Special Advisor to Health Secretary Sajid Javid. And Phil Collins, journalist and speechwriter who wrote Keir Starmer's 2021 Labour conference speech. Good evening to you all. First of all, Ian Dale, as a former Chief of Staff to David Davis, you heard Nick Watt saying the idea came to him on his exercise bike. Nick also said to me earlier that in fact what David Davis did before Prime Minister's questions, he went to Lindsay Hoyle and said to him, obviously, choose me, I've got something significant to say. Is that the kind of thing that you would expect? Any other intelligence on that?
I think that's exactly what happened. I think he came under a lot of pressure from some younger MPs this morning. They said to him, look, you're a big beast, big dog maybe, of the political jungle. It's up to you to lead the way on this. And I think he reflected on that and decided to do what he did. It reminded me of that moment in 2008 when he announced his by-election, where he hadn't consulted any of his allies beforehand because he knew what we'd all say, don't do it. Today was, it's going to be interesting to see the fallout from this, because some of his colleagues were horrified by it. You heard on that clip someone shouting out, shut up. Others think that this is a crucial moment.
Do you give him a hat tip for it?
It's not my role to give him a hat tip for. I think it took balls to do it, let's put it that way.
Salma, what do you think the effect of it will be today on Boris Johnson's fortunes and everything that happened today?
Well, I think actually the newspapers are sort of turning for Boris Johnson tomorrow, and they reflect certainly my view, which is it's sort of granted the Prime Minister a reprieve and bought him some time, and at least until the Sue Gray report. And that is largely because the defection today, rather than David Davis's question, is something that actually has galvanised the parliamentary party. I don't think that's necessarily because it's become more real to them, but actually because Labour have now been handed control over something that really should have looked like and felt like a Tory-led charge if there was going to be a vote of no confidence. And I think the fact that there has been some direct victory for Keir Starmer in this has made people stop and want to think again.
But we could be in a situation where Boris Johnson could survive one, not the other of these two things. He could survive Sue Gray, but he might not survive a vote of confidence if indeed the number of signatures go in that are necessary for the 22.
Yes, that may be the case, but I think people often forget that Theresa May actually won her vote of no confidence and was still out of government 6 months later. So a victory in a no confidence vote is never solely the last word on what's going to happen in terms of leadership. And, you know, I note that you had a Conservative donor on previously who said that, you know, Boris needs to get a grip of his operation. The difficulty here is whether he's capable of doing that, because we've been through about 3 iterations of his core administration in number 10 already. So in order to win a confidence vote and then get to grips with some of the structural problems in his administration are 2 very big things that may not actually materialise.
Labour would want him to win a confidence vote, and they'd want him to win it 52-48.
It's what we were saying, 52-48, what we were saying earlier. Phil Collins, you know, you're a speechwriter. You wrote Keir Starmer's speech in 2021. What did you make of the moment today at Prime Minister's Questions, where David Davis quoted Leo Amery quoting Cromwell, and you know that was the speech that eventually catapulted Churchill to power, and yet Churchill's biographer, i.e. Boris Johnson, said he had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. Was that, do you think, a tiny little fibette?
Yeah, I'm sure he knew exactly what was being said.
It was a lie, yeah. It was
exactly what was being said, and obviously David Davis was quoting that in order to get that resonance, to try and get that moment. And I think it was a significant intervention for 2 reasons. One, because let's not forget what David Davis actually said. The content of his little speech was very important. He talked about the trust and integrity. And if you can't trust the Prime Minister, then he's not morally fit for office. And that is the best argument for getting rid of Boris Johnson. And then the other thing that's very important is that David Davis is so far the person of the biggest political stature which brought for Johnson to go. And this is what's missing in this process, that nobody of significant stature in the cabinet, for example, is yet signalling that they're going to act. And you will not, this won't come to its fruition unless somebody is prepared to act. And if you look across the cabinet and you think, well, who might that be? Who is the assassin here in the end? Well, there's very few people of enough political stature to do it. And the person who my eye keeps alighting on, where I think this story will eventually settle, is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And until you get some movement there, and the moment arises, I think this could easily fizzle out.
Well, Ian Deal, you're very quick to say that was a lie, that he didn't know.
Well, I can't believe that the biographer of Winston Churchill didn't know that quote. It is impossible for me to believe that. And I've spent several years being in your position, upbraiding Labour politicians for calling the Prime Minister a liar, saying we don't want that in our political discourse. But I'm sorry, when you have him appear to not know one of the most famous quotes in political history, and particularly when it was said to propel Churchill into office, you can't believe it.
Now, just coming back to you, Phil Collins, do you think that Keir Starmer got the tone right today? I mean, in a sense, there was quite a lot of, certainly not banter, but, you know, this is an incredibly serious position. And in fact, you know, obviously there's disbelief, and maybe that's what caused some of the laughter and so forth. But were you concerned at all about Keir Starmer's demeanour?
Not remotely, no. It was mockery. And mockery is absolutely in order. And he was absolutely forensic in it. And it's perfectly routine and absolutely fine to mock him. So no, I think laughter has many different functions. It wasn't a series of silly jokes. It was exasperation and mockery. And that's where the position that the Prime Minister has got to. And even if he does survive this particular score, he's really desperately damaged. And I know it is the consensus on the Labour side that a fatally, but not mortally wounded Boris Johnson is probably the candidate they most want. Now, whether they're right about that is a very interesting question, but that's certainly the strong view in those circles.
Yes, but Salma, coming to you on the whole question of how Keir Starmer handled it, what would you say? Because earlier you said, in a sense, what happened today had the effect of, you know, rounding the wagons up.
Yeah, but I think that sort of mockery, as Phil points out, is something that the Tory backbenchers would not appreciate and would find completely uncomfortable, because ultimately they know that when Keir Starmer is attacking Boris Johnson, that all of that is eventually going to filter down to them at some point as well. either at a constituency level or, more generally for the Conservative brand. And we are in a tribal system of politics. So, that won't sit well. If they're going to depose the Prime Minister, it's got to be their call and their shout to do it.
It's interesting what Ian was saying, though, about, the fact that, David Davis is kind of the biggest figure to have come out, that nobody in the cabinet will come out. Not surprising. But do you think there's going to be a point at which things are going to become more, as it were, we talk about implicit and explicit, more explicit from his critics in the cabinet?
Well, I think have to be.
Well, just let me finish, just quick to Salma. That's what it'll take.
Well, it's interesting because there's been such a reliance on the Sue Gray report in terms of lines that have been coming out from cabinet ministers. Is that the point at which this then breaks? And we've already had really heavy briefing about what's going to happen in the Sue Gray report in terms of the fact that all she's going to do is set out the facts. Well, does that really move anything on? Does that bring this to a close? Probably not. And then, yourself and other journalists are basically going to be asking every cabinet minister, do they think it's the end of the matter?
And very quickly, lawyers argue over facts, for goodness sake. If Sue Gray is simply putting together a selection of facts.
Well, people are assuming an awful lot about Sue Gray's report. We don't know exactly what she's going to say. She hasn't finished interviewing people yet, so let's wait and see for that. Just going back to the Keir Starmer point, I did think it was quite...
Hang on, I thought my mistake. I thought she had talked to Boris Johnson already.
She has, but she hasn't talked to Dominic Cummings yet, and she said she is going to talk to him. But on the Keir Starmer point, I did think it was quite amusing. I mean, he did deliver some quite good lines and was chortling along, and then in the next breath says, but of course we want the Prime Minister to be serious.
Yes, very briefly, Phil Collins. Where do you think it's going to go next, within the next week?
I think that unless somebody big moves it on and is prepared to be the assassin, it will probably fizzle out. But Boris Johnson, they can't delude themselves, like Jake Berry's comic turn earlier. He cannot delude themselves. This is a real fact now. And Boris Johnson has been to some extent unmasked. So even if it doesn't come to a final settlement this week, this is in the bloodstream now, and it's only a matter of time.
Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Well, that's it from us, but I'll be back tomorrow. Until then, for more politics from us, goodbye.